So today we're going to be talking about a very controversial subject, and it has to do with why I'm not a fan of adrenal saliva testing. We're going to be talking about the stages of adrenal fatigue. A lot of people will say, hey, I'm stage 1, or I'm stage 5, I'm stage 4. What are the best supplements for me to be taking if I'm stage 1 or I'm stage 3? I'm going to be talking about, I don't believe in adrenal fatigue supplements. We'll talk about that. And probably most controversially, I'm going to be talking about why you can't spot reduced. So you can't necessarily take a hormone or bioidenticals or synthetics or even supplements and attempt to boost or lower your hormones or normalize your hormone levels, and why that's not effective. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So let me first ask you these questions. Does this sound like you have no energy? You get tired very easily. You don't have any stress tolerance. So whether it's your to-do list, whether it's your social circle, your family, your job, the government, the social media, the news, the climate of your country, all of that is overwhelming you. And potentially the weak links in your chains break, where you have no libido, you have no drive, you have no capacity. And we're talking about you don't have the ability. A lot of guys don't want to admit this, but they don't have the ability to perform. They can't perform on demand, or they are unable to sustain it, or it's a very quick draw McGraw, if you will, or women just have no desire. And this happens with a lot of people. Maybe you're emotional, maybe you're very, very moody. You know your hormones are imbalanced, you just know subjectively they are. And when you go to see your doctor, they want to take a reductionistic approach. And they'll say, hey, let's restore your youthful levels by giving you synthetic or bioidentical hormones. And I'm going to be controversial in today's talk because I don't see that as being the big solution. Now, a lot of people will do very well with it, short term, or maybe even long term. They can, but that's the few and the far between. And those are the people that I would say aren't all the way down the continuum, and a lot of things are going wrong in their body. So, and then I'll also be talking about do you identify with hot flashes, tenderness, cold or hot inability to regulate your body temperature. And the new term is the male andropause or the female menopause. If you have female or male menopausal symptoms, then this video is going to be for you. So again, what we're going to be covering is why I'm not a fan of saliva testing. And I've done saliva testing on myself and my clientele. And ultimately, I found that it doesn't give me the precision information that I need. And a lot of the clients that I work with will send me their saliva tests, or a lot of people in a Facebook group that I manage and run will tell me, here's my saliva test, and what should I do? And it's like saying, okay, here's my blood test, my cholesterol is here, what should I do? And it's like, well, what's going on with everything else? You're giving me one variable. It's like, I'm looking at the ocean and what's going on? It's like, well, there's a boat right ahead of me, but I have no idea what's going on in the entire ocean. That's really the analogy I would use. I don't believe in the adrenal supplements. Sure, there are some small short-term solutions that you could use, but I would definitely want to make sure I'm looking at an objective, as many labs as I could to make a recommendation, and balance the triage of giving you what you need at the 30,000 view foot while making our way upstream and getting to the root or the causes. And very seldom is it one silver bullet or needle in the haystack. It's a multitude of systems. It's your mindset, it's your limbic center, it's your amygdala, it's your thought processes, it's your circadian rhythm, it's your blood sugar balance, it's your social circles, it's your diet, it's your outlook on life, it's your physiology, it's your genetics, it's your detox pathways, it's your inflammation control. It's all of those things. How are you going to fix that with taking an adaptogen? You're not going to do. How are you going to fix that with taking a synthetic or a bioidentical? You're not. And when doctors, especially allopathic traditional doctors say, oh, I'm a functional medicine doctor, we're just going to yell at your deaf person louder and give them as much information as we can. The analogy being, we're just going to load you up with more hormones, and you don't understand the pathology and the causes. Are you doing more harm than good? You're a violation of that Hippocratic oath. And when I work with clients, some of the toughest clients that I see, which is getting worse and worse and worse. It really is. And that's not because genetics are changing. It's because environment is changing. We have too many chemicals, too many solvents, too many pesticides, too many industrial compounds, too much social media, too much dopamine, too much EMF at a higher rate than our body's able to adapt to. And it's creating massive amounts of inflammation in our body. And ultimately, you're not going to fix that with a saliva test or identify what's going on with the saliva test, or you're not going to be able to take bioidentical hormones to address that. So I always say, like, hey, why should you listen to me? Well, I've suffered with my own adrenal fatigue problem. It's my dedication in life now. It's what I'm designed or destined to do, is to tell the truth about adrenal fatigue. It goes deeper than the adrenals. And adrenal fatigue is a crappy term. It goes deeper than the HPA axis. Ultimately, it goes right down to the cellular level where your body's not able to produce ATP effectively. And Otto Warburg coined the term the Warburg effect. He was a German physicist who had a Nobel Prize, and later in his older age, he was ridiculed because the flat world thinkers said there's no such thing as a round world. It can't be a round world, Otto. And he was laughed out of a lot of conferences. Why was he laughed out of a lot of these conferences? Because he said ultimately cancers and pathology is a simple problem. And what it is it's a problem of cellular respiration. And what that means is when you took high school chemistry and you looked at the Krebs cycle and oxidative phosphorylation and ATP production, much like a socket or a plug or an outlet, you have a copper wire that bounces electrons to produce a charge and to be able to have electricity. Our body works the same way, very similarly, and it has to help to pass electrons to be able to use ATP. And it needs oxygen to do that. And when your cells aren't able to utilize oxygen effectively because there's too much inflammation in the body, then, or maybe there's iron challenges because we've enriched the soils, we've man-made polluted the environment that makes your cells much more difficult to respire properly. And Otto Warburg coined the term the Warburg effect, which basically what you have is you have a person who isn't efficiently taking oxygen in the cell. It's there, but they're not utilizing it to pass electrons to generate a charge, so they ferment glucose. And when they ferment glucose, it's less effective. It creates a lot of oxidative smoke, if you will. It's a dirty burning fuel, and it's a short-lasting fuel. It's like kindling to the flame. Why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because this is what's causing fatigue in today's day and age, is we have these continuums of cellular respiration problems. Your body is not producing ATP effectively, and we're trying to reductionistically give you an adaptogen or licorice root or phosphatidylserine or bioidentical hormones to fix that, and it's not going to work. So it's a cellular problem. I've been told there's no such thing as adrenal fatigue. I've been laughed out of the doctor's room. I've been looked at like I'm a crazy. I've been insulted. I've been told all you need to do is just relax and exercise. And I look at the doctor and say, I need to exercise? You need to exercise. You need to have some integrity, man. You need to practice what you preach. It doesn't make sense for a broke financial planner to give me financial advice. It doesn't make sense to me for a unhealthy, hypocritical, do as I say, not as I do doctor giving you tools on how to be healthy when they're not healthy themselves. And on top of that, they're condescending, they're holier than thou, and they're breaking their Hippocratic oath. Okay, I just got a little bit sidetracked, but that just charges me up when that happens. Ultimately, I've created a site called the Truth About Adrenal Fatigue, and I care about you getting better, and I'm willing to be the advocate. I'm willing to put the bullseye chart on the back of my back and say, hey, you could fire at me all you want. I know the research. It comes out of PubMed journals and articles. You're 17 years behind. You're still listening to 8-track tapes, and you're wondering what the satellite feed that's coming out of the sky is producing music is not real. And that's the analogy I would use. So what am I going to be discussing? Well, I'm going to be talking about the new definition about adrenal fatigue. I've created a couple other videos that I can send links to you for. I'm going to talk to you about a little bit of that today. We're going to be talking about some of the reasons why I don't like the saliva test. Now, it's useful. There are some good solutions or good insights that it can give you, but it's one piece of the puzzle. It's like looking at an x-ray from one side, from one view, and saying, okay, I'm looking at it from front to back. We call it A to P, or we're looking at it in the coronal plane, where you're slicing the body sort of in half from a front to back point of view, and you're saying there's no fracture. I'll see you later. But you may not see it on face. You have to turn it to the side and do a sagittal view from left to right, and even an oblique view and maybe even another view. And that's why we like MRIs and CT scans, because they can slice it into so many different ways. But you would never just do a one x-ray view and say, okay, you don't have a problem, because it's limited. Or you would never put blinders on and look out in the ocean and say, okay, there's no boats out there. It's the same thing as a saliva test. Saliva test is one utility. And the more tests I can get, the better. Now, obviously, insurance is not going to pay for that, and that's a whole other story. But if I could look at blood, I could look at urine, I could look at hair, I could look at saliva. Now I'm getting a lot of useful information. I also want to talk to you about why it's not effective to spot reduce. And most importantly, what can I do about it? So what's the truth about adrenal fatigue? I talked about this the other day. Basically, people call it an HPA axis dysfunction. So the brain, the limbic centers, the reptilian part of the brain that's been conditioned over the millennia for fight or flight, for feeding, for food, for fornication, it's been engineered, that reptilian brain, to think about it in terms of that. Is this going to allow me to survive, or is this going to allow me to procreate? If not, then I got to do the best I can. That's the HPA axis. But now when you put on top of that the higher brain and the frontal lobe and the amygdala, we attach meaning to this. And then we start to have, if you will, a programmed loop of the stimulus that we receive may not be enough to cause the crazy outpouring and downstream impact, but because we have an emotional center and a recording, if you will, a feedback loop, it could be that much more impactful physiologically. It's a whole other Facebook Live, a whole other video we'll talk about. But so stress, which is chemical, environmental, emotional, spiritual, more so than any day and age, we have stressors. Just look at the computers and the power you have in your hands and all the different access to information and EMFs. It's just bombarding our sensory input, that it stimulates your HPA axis, that impacts you at the cellular level, that causes a breakdown in cellular respiration, and it doesn't allow you to produce ATP, and you have to produce ATP through fermentation of glucose, which will create metabolic issues. And that's what we're seeing a tidal wave of. And then if we're not exercising, if we're not moving, if we're not eating healthy, if we don't have good social relationships, if we don't have any of that, it's just compounding even further and further. But what I wanted to tell you about is the mast cells. The mast cells stimulate the HPA axis. What are the mast cells? The mast cells are ultimately your immune system. So we have been designed to encounter pathogens and compounds or chemicals that our immune system has to coordinate and signal and deal with and remove and help maintain our homeostasis in our body. That stimulates the HPA axis. So if I'm taking an adrenal supplement and I'm trying to fix my cortisol that's really low on a saliva test, which the saliva test may not even be accurate because we're only looking at one view like I talked about. Also, there's a lot of compensations that happen in the body, so that even though you're looking at your free fraction of the hormone, which the saliva test does, there's a lot of compensations in your body that maintains that free fraction, makes it look normal, but there's so many other things that are working hard and grinding to a halt and having the gears grinding and smoking, that it's maintained the saliva number to make it look good, or it's low and we're trying to reductionistically fix that by playing at the 30,000 view foot. And it's like saying, okay, I'm gonna give you a high blood pressure medication, go home, you don't have to take accountability of your health. You don't have to eat healthy, you don't have to change your diet, you don't have to avoid sodium-based foods, you don't have to contract your muscles and move your muscles and have good positive relationships and get good sunlight. Just take this supplement and we'll fix it. People have lost the accountability of getting their health back on their own, and we're relying on government, health departments, and companies that are out to make millions and gazillions of dollars to dictate how we practice our own health. Again, sidetracked, but that's how I feel. So why do I not like saliva tests? Now listen, I do like saliva tests for one main reason, that it's a very good test to look at your circadian rhythm. So we should wake up in the morning, we should have a lot of energy, we should then have slowly declining levels of energy by the time nighttime comes, and then we fall asleep like a baby. If that circadian rhythm is off, you're a third shift worker, you crash in the middle of the day, you need a little pick-me-up, a caffeine pick-me-up, or sugar pick-me-up, then chances are, or you're not falling asleep, or you're reversed, you're starting to get more energy at night and you have no energy in the morning, your circadian rhythm is off, and a saliva test correlates very nicely in the research to your circadian rhythm. So yes, I want to have an x-ray where I'm looking straight on, because their fracture could be there. And if in case you joined me late, the reason I'm bringing up that analogy is you want as many views as you can, and the saliva is one view. But what I don't like about it is there's a lot of compensatory mechanisms in the body that can skew those saliva values, even though they look normal, that doesn't tell us the whole story. And one of them is free versus bound cortisol. So we know that the saliva is your free fraction of the hormone, meaning it's not bound to a protein. It's the amount that's available for use. It's like our spending money. We may have income that we make for a day's of work, but it's whatever we have in our wallet to spend is the useful amount of the hormone. So that's again why people like the saliva test, which is another value that's good about it. However, you can have mechanisms in the body that changes your binding capacity. So maybe you have more bound cortisol to albumin or cortisol binding hormone because your body wants to protect the amount of free fraction. That's a compensatory mechanism. And we got to understand, or maybe your body's not binding as much cortisol and making it more free, and that's a compensatory mechanism. And we're making decisions on one view of the x-ray when that view of the x-ray has a lot of other variables that are skewing what we're actually seeing. Hope that made sense to you. Number two is the 11 beta HSD. So this is the field marshal. So this is sort of like the army, the sergeant that's in the field, and he decides who goes, or she decides who goes to battle. So are we going to put the active troops in battle, or are we going to deactivate them and put them into reserves? And when you do a free fraction saliva test, you're not able to see that. And that's a very important number or value to look at. It tells me whether or not you have a cellular problem, meaning maybe you are producing, your brain, your HPA axis is signaling to the adrenals, hey, you got to make a lot of cortisol, we're under stress. Perhaps you're binding less, you're binding more, but 11 beta HSD at the cellular level is saying, look, dude, you're producing way too much cortisol. It's catabolic, it's breaking us down, we're exhausted, our immune system's depleted, go into active reserves. How are you going to see that on a saliva test? You're just not. The other thing is genomic cortical signaling. So what does that mean? It means that cortisol has to bind to the receptors, and that produces a genomic effect. Catabolic natures, breaking down your glucose, creating an immune reaction, making your your anti-inflammatories, signaling your mineral balances. It creates it's like a code that you put on your computer and you press enter and it runs the system. And if you have improper signaling, improper genomics, genetic susceptibilities, you're not repairing your cell membranes, the receptors aren't there, how are you going to tell that on a saliva test? You're not. I really wish doctors would watch this as well, because it's light years ahead of, there's no such thing as adrenal fatigue. I agree with you. There's no such thing as adrenal fatigue, but let's agree on understanding the physiology of what's going wrong, so you don't dismiss your patient and tell them that they're crazy, or they're a symptom magnifier, or they're looking for attention, or they want to feel this horrible because they just, it's enjoyable. You are insulting our intelligence as a doctor when you tell people that. Heat shock proteins. So these are, and there's heat shock proteins, there's also cold shock proteins. We're learning more and more, but ultimately these heat shock proteins help chaperone the cortisol inside of the cytosol. And this is all fancy talk to say you may have a certain baseline measurable saliva cortisol in your saliva, but we don't know actually what's going on, because we don't know if it's getting used inside the cell, because these heat shock proteins are supporting your body. It's a cell danger response. Non-genomic signaling. So other things can signal the impact of cortisol's production. We're even seeing that you don't have to have an HPA axis. Cortisol could be produced in the skin. So there's so many things that are in the adipose tissue. Non-genomic signaling, that's what I just talked about. And then cortisol metabolism has to do with how fast do we clear it. You're not going to see it. Do we clear it slow? Do we clear it fast? You're not going to see that on a saliva test. So that's a little bit advanced information, I definitely know. What I would just say is that the easy way to think of this is your body's very intelligent. And if you have a supply and demand problem, your demand for energy, your demand for ATP, your demand for toxin removal, your demand for creating blood pressure elevations or decreases, temperature regulations, pH balance, heart rate, blood pressure, all of the things that you need to do is really high and your supply is really low, then your body's going to pull out the stops. It's going to deactivate cortisol. It's not going to signal. It may bind more proteins, could have more heat shock proteins. There's a lot of things going on behind the scenes, and you're looking at a non-sensitive marker like saliva to make fast conclusions. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So that's why I don't like the stages of adrenal fatigue. It really chaps me up when I see someone in this group or send me in question, and I feel bad because it's like, I got to create a video. This is too hard to explain to you. But ultimately, stages of adrenal fatigue is terrible to come up with an educational tool, because everything I just said, and it's not linear. It means some people have a way of dealing with it by going down these sides of the train tracks. Some people have a way of dealing with it by going down those sides of the train tracks. And to say everyone's the same, and you have stage 1 where it's very high, stage 2 where then your cortisol is only high, stage 3 is when your cortisol is high and your DHEA goes low, stage 4 is now your DHEA goes low, stage 5 is now your cortisol goes low, stage 6 is now your cortisol is low and your DHEA is high, and stage 7 is DHEA is high, and stage 8 they're all low. To me, it's like, I don't even care about that. I want to know what's stimulating your mast cells, what's your stressors, what's your circadian rhythm, what's going on in your body, what's going on with your life. I'm not going to supplement you according to this. I'm going to get to the root cause, and not just supplement, not just diet, but lifestyle, so many things that we need to address. So that's why I don't like the staging. And this is what it really comes down to, is looking at the genomic susceptibility, doing a genetic test, looking at your constitution, looking at your circadian rhythm, looking at your goals, looking at where you are now, where you want to go, looking at what fits your lifestyle, doing less is more. What supplements are you taking that aren't really doing anything for you except adding to your bottom line bill every month, and you're not sure which one's working and which one's not working, this is what we need to know about your adrenal tests or your adrenal function. So ultimately, I don't believe in the supplements because it's reductionistically thinking, it's expensive, it's not as effective, and it's not customized. That's why I do not like the supplements. Now, as far as you can't spot reduce, so increasing your hormones, bioidentical hormones, synthetic hormones, let's restore your youthful levels. I see major nightmares with clients that I work with that are male, that go on growth hormone and testosterone, and their libido has been low, their motivation has been low, their drive has been low, their ability to perform and sustain an erection has been low. And then they take testosterone, and maybe some of them have a really amazing response, but it's the minority, because you have to think about, why is the libido low? Why is the motivation and drive low? Why is the capacity low? Why is the desire low? Why is it low? Is because you have a demand and supply problem. You have a cellular respiration problem. You have a genetic perfect storm environmental triggers impacting your body, and you're expecting testosterone to fix that, and it's not going to fix that. It's a short-term problem. In fact, I tell people, I'm a golf pro, and I'm going to help you use the best swing and hit the ball and get the best score as possible. I'd rather have you come to me when you haven't swung a club before versus coming to me and you learn the worst possible way to swing a club as possible. That's what going on hormones would be with a lot of these people. It's like, not only did you not fix the problem, but you also compounded the problem by adding a protocol or procedure that made things worse, that we now have to clean up that spilt milk and get back to the root cause of the problem. Now, some women can do very well with it. Maybe there's celiac concerns or fatty acid absorption, utilization, dietary restrictions concerns, and you're not absorbing your hormones, or you're not making and manufacturing your hormones. And a lot of women will say to me, oh, they've done very well with it. Yes, I would say, great, good for you. I'm glad to hear that. However, do you have anything else going on? Well, why are you in my form? I mean, you have fatigue, you have inability to handle stress, you have a circadian rhythms disruption, so you're more energized at night and less in the morning. You have brain fog, you have joint pains, you have lack of motivation, you have GI disturbances, you have all of these different things, but yet your bioidentical hormones are defended to the very last drop, because without them, you wouldn't be doing well. I get that, but doesn't it tell you something's missing? It should. So ultimately, so how do we combat this? Well, I'll continue to create content for you so that you can understand how this works. But understanding the truth about adrenal fatigue, it's a crappy term. The physiology doesn't necessarily mean that your adrenals aren't producing any hormones. It means that your HPA axis is over signaling or under signaling or metabolically changing because of your inability to meet the demands of your physiological needs. And ultimately, you need to know the factors, your own factors that stimulate your mast cells. You need to get a proper genetic test. You need to test the HPA axis, in my opinion, as many ways as you can. Urine, saliva, hair, blood, and then put all the puzzle pieces together. And what I really say is you need to triage what you need right now. You need to put out the bleeding neck problem with then getting upstream and addressing the root or the causes of these challenges so that you can get your life back. And it's totally possible. I see it all